Hello, this is yours truly, Charles Prosper, your consistency success coach. And I was inspired to do this video by something that happened this morning as I was watching one of the David Baer videos on self-realization, motivation, and prosperity and things of that nature, who is a presenter who is somewhat of the Tony Robbins style motivational teacher with a touch of spirituality mixed in. So anyway, he was talking about the power of now, the importance of living in the present moment. And also, I might add, is that recently I have been thinking a lot about how meaningful coincidences really become tantamount to the divine language of God. I always like to say that of the many languages that exist, for example, Japanese, Chinese, Portuguese, Burmese, coincidence is God-ese. That is the language of God. And recently I have been fascinated once more, because I've always been interested in the subject of meaningful coincidences, that I was considering watching this particular installment by this presenter where he was going to touch upon time and how coincidences happen within time. And, well, I'm kind of going in circles right now, but what I'm trying to say is that he made a statement that time doesn't exist, but time just measures movement or the change of events. And so I remember my daughter, who from the age of 7 years old to 11 years old came out with some very powerful and sage statements, such that I put together a book of her sayings, which is this one, The Sayings of Loose Emily, the 7-year-old sage, and it can be found on Amazon. But the purpose of my saying this is not so much to toot the importance of my daughter having written a book, but something that happened that relates to her book. Now, she would say very profound statements all of the time from the ages of 7 to 12. Let me give you an example. For example, at 8 years old, she said, "You can't stop life from killing you." At 9 years old, she said, "When you know something, it's a secret. Once you tell someone else, it is no longer a secret." At 10 years old, she said, "There is no such thing as good or bad luck, only how you think of yourself." At 11 years old, she said, "Life is not short if you spend it well." So this is an entire book, 100 pages of her sayings. So when this particular presenter on YouTube was talking about how time doesn't exist and that time is really a measurement of movement of things that happen within the space we call time, I remembered I said to myself, the sage, I call my daughter the sage said something to this nature when she was, I think, 11 years old. Let me pick up her book and flip through the page and see if I can find it. So I picked the book up and I randomly, that's a word that is very curious because there's no such thing as randomness, and I flipped it really quickly. I just did like this, and guess what happened? When I randomly flipped the book open, it opened up exactly to the page. Out of 100 pages in this book, it landed exactly on the page where she was talking about time, which she says on the nature of time. Time is movement, and if there is no time, there is no movement. Loose Emily Prosper, 11 years old. So this was a significant coincidence that just blew me away. I'm going like, wow. Talk about coincidence being the divine language of God. And so I came across a thought of something that I plan to do from here on, and that I'm suggesting that you do this also. Let me get it right here. Create a book of significant and meaningful coincidences. That is, every time a significant and meaningful coincidence happens to you, which I believe is the communication of God to you to say yes to whatever it is that you're doing, write this down as a journal entry, a coincidence entry, so that such today that what I'm going to do is I'm going to write, today is October the 21st, 2025. I was listening to a YouTube video on the nature of time, and that time is just a measurement of movement. And when I went to open up my daughter's book, I randomly opened the book up, and it opened up out of 100 pages to page 43, where she says, time is movement, and where there's no time, there's no movement. It fell exactly on that page. This was a significant coincidence, a meaningful coincidence for me, which inspired me from this point to keep a daily diary of meaningful coincidences. And so why am I doing this installment is because I want to encourage you to create this same habit of creating a diary of significant coincidences. And what you're going to find is that you will notice meaningful coincidences more and more. You will be able to interpret the language of God to you more and more, and you will have a dialogue or an open communication with God on a regular basis. Once you begin to notice something, it will appear more and more in your life. So that is my suggestion to you, which is something that as of today I will begin to practice, is to keep a diary of coincidences. And so I suggest to you to do the same. If you were ever wondering, does God ever talk to me? Why doesn't God answer my prayers? Why doesn't God communicate to me? I'm telling you, this is the way to see that God is constantly communicating to you, but you just don't notice that a communication happened because you weren't or have not been aware that this is God talking to you through coincidences. So this is my message to you today. Get a journal of some sort and start noticing significant coincidences that happen that are divine messages and communications from the Almighty, guiding you, reaffirming to you that you're on the right path. Okay, that's my message for today. And as always, I wish for you to stay consistent, be successful, and as of now, pay attention to those significant and meaningful coincidences, which are divine communications from God.